part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History of Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole.
Dearest listeners, we are here to discuss the dreadful Netflix adaptation of Persuasion that has undoubtedly been causing Jane Austen to roll in her grave for the last few weeks. I think I can speak for both of us when I say that disliking this film brings neither of us any joy. I think we both went into this very hopeful and, ready to be surprised, but unfortunately, it was a letdown. And that is our warning that if you liked Persuasion, this might not be the podcast episode for you. If you're looking for a podcast that is going to dunk on this respectfully, well, mostly respectfully, this is actually the podcast for you. So,
yep. All right.
Let's get into it.
This Persuasion was directed by Carrie Cracknell, my now sworn enemy. Just kidding. Or am I? Actually, no, my enemies are the writers of the screenplay, Ron Bass and Alice Victoria Winslow. It is, kind of based on the novel by Jane Austen. And
I'm convinced this is what happens when you stick a book under your pillow and hope that osmosis will happen and that you'll absorb it overnight.
I don't even think they read the full Spark Notes. But
I don't think they read the cover.
The movie stars Dakota Johnson, Maggie's face twin, Cosmo Jarvis, Nikki Amuka Bird, Mia McKenna Bruce, Richard E. Grant, and Henry Golding. What did you think of Persuasion, Maggie?
Well, what listeners can't see is that my notes for this specific question is just lull, because that's kind of how I felt. I did get a heads up from Nicole before I went into this movie that it was not exactly what either of us were hoping it would be. I really was excited for this film because, one, I love Dakota Johnson. I have the same face as her, so I'm kind of inclined to watch things that she's in. I also watched a really spectacular film a few months ago at a film festival that Cosmo Jarvis starred in, and I was like, he's so good. He has a very specific style of acting that I've noticed a few people that don't really like it, and that's fine. But and it doesn't really work super well in Persuasion. He does this kind of gruff, mumbly thing. Really worked in the film I saw a couple months back. And I was like, oh, that's going to make such a good introduction as Captain Whitworth, because he's a little bit standoffish. He's not a Darcy, but he's definitely he's lived through things. And the cast is really pretty. There's literally not an unattractive person in this, and they all do really well with what they're given in terms of a script. I learned something the other day that made me kind of wither and die. Apparently Netflix like this so much that they're considering letting Ron do Pride and Prejudice. And I would just like to file a formal complaint with Netflix. You can do period dramas exceptionally well. People love Bridgerton. I love Bridgerton. And
I love Bridgerton. I love Enola Holmes.
Yeah, Enola Holmes, another great one. And that's
so
one
great.
that lends itself to that more anachronistic fun, just because we've already had things that have come before, with the Sherlock Holmes movies that Robert Downey Jr. was in. Those movies were very fun, and Enola Holmes is great. And Netflix, with the right creative team, does know how to do fun things with period dramas, but this was just not it. And I actually said this to my mom when we were watching this, borrowing from Nicole's age-old verbiage. Dakota Johnson looks like she's used a microwave.
Yep. And they're not doing her any favors with how they've styled her.
Like, because my mom was like, you can pull off, like, I pull off historical stuff quite well. I've done a lot of historical dramas and like I've done historical reenacting, and it all comes down to how they styled her. They had her wearing too much makeup, then not enough makeup. Her hair is awful. They like do her no favors.
Also, I know that you're going to talk about costumes later, but I think her costumes look significantly less nice.
Oh, I hate them.
Than everyone else around her. Like the rest of the costumes are fine. It's just hers that she continually looks like she's a girl who's going to the Bridgerton Secret Cinema. And there's nothing wrong with going to the Bridgerton Secret Cinema. I support all you girlies. I wish I was there and could do it. But that's not how the lead in Persuasion should look. Like some of the dresses she has on just look cheap. And some of them look like, I don't know, like some weird sort of, we watched Pride and Prejudice 2005 one time and didn't take any notes.
Yes.
And then made these costumes.
100%. And the thing that like got me was like when I first, like for somebody who works in news entertainment, like I consume so much information at such a high volume that I don't really retain a lot of it. So I remember when I first saw the pictures for this film, I didn't really know what like the plot was. Like I'm sure I just like read the plot, made sure it was correct, and like my writer wrote it or whatever. Like I don't really remember like when this initially was announced, but I remember the first pictures. And I remember seeing Dakota Johnson and thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be like that Carrie Russell, Jane Austen, like where it's the retreat and they get to dress up and like have their like Jane Austen moment, because it looked so much like I got this from a rental shop.
Yep.
And like everybody
also,
else.
Austen Land. Great.
Yeah.
Film.
I love Austen Land. Like I honestly was like, oh, this is going to be like an Austen, because we had that like knowledge that it was going to be very Fleabag-ish. Yep. And so I was like, oh, this is so cool. This is going to be like a modern Persuasion where like, oh, maybe Anne like reunites with like her ex-boyfriend at this retreat that he just like happens to be at. Like there's,
that would have been so fun.
Right? That was what I thought this was going to be. I was like, oh, maybe they're gonna like rewrite it. Like he's got a sister who like drags him to this like weekend getaway, and oh my God, my ex is here. And it's this like whole thing. Cause like none of their costumes really were, it wasn't giving. It really wasn't giving Austen. It was giving like fun reenactment.
It was giving secret cinema.
It was giving secret cinema. Yes, that is exactly what it was giving. And that was what I came into this like not expecting. It's like by that point I've seen the trailer. I know what the movie is going to be about. That was like just when the first pictures came out, I had that like assumption. But like I came into this expecting it to be like just, I don't know, so much different. And the anachronism just like pulled me out of it so much. Like the playlist thing, her being basically a wine aunt. The like,
why was she like a low-key alcoholic?
I don't know.
Like if I saw a friend who was drinking in that manner, I would be like, let's have a talk about your relationship with alcohol.
She's not well. And I was like, this, and the thing was, is that it wasn't like, I don't know. I like a drink, but I'm very cognizant of how like pseudo alcoholism is portrayed on screen, just because like I know people who are sober and I know people who have dealt with, you know, addiction, and the way that this was portrayed was just grotesque in a lot of ways, because it was played off for laughs when it was very clearly that she had a problem, but it wasn't actually a factor into it. It was just what made her like a quirky girl, like, oh, she's 28 and she drinks too much, but she's kind of a fun wine aunt who gets drunk and cries and like is a mess. And I was like, none of this is fun. This isn't fun. This is depressing. But yeah, so those are like my abridged opinions.
Yep. I want to share an anecdote before I get into my thoughts. So for listeners who don't know, I got a puppy recently. Theo's a little over 3 months old. He's the light of my life. And I recently watched Persuasion for the second time, which shows my love for our friend Rhiannon, that I was willing to watch it with her, to experience it with her virtually. But at the scene with the like opera singer that they go see, Theo literally sits up and starts barking and howling in a way I've never heard him do before. I will actually, as a matter of fact, help me remember this, Maggie. When we post this episode, I will post the video I took of him howling his head off. And I was like crying, laughing because I was like, what is going on? I told my mom about this. She told me she's been keeping Theo for me while I'm at work during the day, so that he's not like a 3-month puppy alone in my apartment. And at the same exact time when she was watching it, he started howling. So, and it's not just like all music, because I listen to music all the time and he does not respond to it at all. So I don't know what it is, but Theo is not a fan of Persuasion either.
He has given his first film review.
Yeah, and it was not good.
Oh.
I should be honest and say I love the novel Persuasion. It is one of my like favorite works of literature. And what's funny about it is that I read it for the first time when I was like 23, and I was like, this is good, but like it's not one of my favorites of Jane Austen's. Like I don't really get it. And then I reread it last year and I cried my entire way through the novel. Anne Elliot in the book is 27. I am 27. She, feels like she sort of missed out her chance at life. And I don't know, there's a lot in it that I relate to. Mm-hmm. And I think also like being a woman who is obviously being 27 now is not what it was in Regency England, which we're going to talk about later. But I think, and you can relate to this as well. Like whenever you're getting towards your 30s as a single woman, especially whenever you're still sort of trying to figure out what's going on with your career, what's going on with your social life. I think there's a lot in Anne Elliot's situation that you can relate to. And I think that, I'll go into this later too, but I also think that there's something really interesting about the thought of Jane Austen writing this as she's 40 years old, knowing that, she is never going to get her Wentworth reunion moment. Like, the life that we see Anne leading at the beginning of the book is the life that she will lead till her death. And I think it's such a melancholy work. Mm-hmm. And it's so mature compared to Jane's other novels, that this movie is not Persuasion.
No.
And the thing is, I'm not necessarily opposed to the Fleabagification of Jane Austen. I think that, maybe they saw Autumn de Wilde's Emma and thought this is what it was, which that movie is literally perfect and handles Emma like in a way that brings out the humor that is naturally in the story.
Mm-hmm. And that's why adaptations like Clueless work so well, because Emma is a very adaptable, shiftable, changeable, malleable story.
Would not be opposed to seeing like Northanger Abbey done in this sort of Fleabaggy style. Okay, yes, but that relies so much on us accepting Catherine Morland as a sort of unreliable main character.
I wouldn't trust these writers to do it. Well, I feel like it would have to be done I literally was like, I had a meltdown with my mom. I was like, they're going to do this to Northanger Abbey. They're going to ruin like my favorite Jane Austen, my favorite like Jane Austen movie. They're like,
I love Northanger.
Catherine, like Catherine Morland is me. Like everything about her, like that's the Austen heroine that I like relate to the most. And like she's such a stupid character sometimes. Like, and I'm afraid that they would like girl bossify her.
My thing is like that movie with Felicity Jones and JJ Field. Amazing. The way that they like play out her like daydreams and her like inserting herself into the stories that she reads, that's all very like fun and like kind of quirky and feels a little bit more like what they were sort of, I think what the thought was with this movie and its inception, but doing it in a way that is true to the story. And I don't think you can make like a quirky, fun movie out of Persuasion and be true to the story that's being told. Like,
well, I think that if they had approached this with like millennial dread, instead of zillennial buzzwords, I think you would have been able to
Like, even if they approached it with Gen Z existential dread, I've never seen a generation with more existential dread
This
than
is
Gen
true.
Z. But they instead were like, how many buzzwords can we get in? Empath, check it off. Self-care, check it off. Like, and it just turned out so...
He's a 10. I never trust 10.
Oh,
Oh, shut up, Anne Elliot.
I think the thing is that if you think that you need to modernize Jane Austen like this, you don't understand Jane Austen. Like, there is a reason that her works have been best-selling since they came out, basically. There's a reason that we still read her. She's one of the classic authors that people read in large numbers outside of academic contexts. And the reason for that is because we can still relate to these because they're all about relationships. And I'm not opposed at all to putting things into like a modern setting. Like, I am the biggest fan of the Lizzie Bennet diaries.
My favorite that got me through college.
Right? One of my favorite movies truly is Bride and Prejudice, the modern
I was just
Bollywood.
going to say that the Bollywood one is so good. The fact that Pride and Prejudice has been adapted into almost every culture that has like a film industry that's thriving. The fact that that can be done is a testament to how Jane Austen's stories are just about people and they're about relationships. And you just take what like makes those stories work and they can be turned into anything.
Exactly.
But you have to approach them with depth. And this is just something that this doesn't do.
And I think my thing is, if you want to take one of these works and sort of make a very different work based on it, like Clueless, and say like inspired by Jane Austen's work, I'm okay with that. Where I have a problem with this is that it claims to be Persuasion. And I think my problem with that is, you know, there are people who are like, oh, well, what if it brings new people to Austen's work, yada, yada. And I think, if you like this, and then you go read the actual novel Persuasion,
you'll be disappointed.
You're going to be disappointed or you're going to feel misled. B, I think a lot of people are going to watch this and be like, oh God, I'm never reading that. Like, and the actual novel is so damn good that I worry that this is going to turn people off of it. And that would truly just like kill me. But I will say to the movie's credit, there are two things I can praise. One is Richard E. Grant is delightful in this.
He's good at so much. The man is a marvel.
So consistently good. He's so underused in this. Every time he was in a scene, I was like, I want 3 more scenes with him. I also think Mia McKenna-Bruce as Mary is the only person who understood the assignment here. Because as much as I hate what they were doing, she was the only person playing it with the self-awareness that I think it needed to work.
She's a really good actress.
Right. I also think Mary is the only character that this style actually works for. Like, I almost wish they had given us Persuasion from her perspective. Like, let her be the main character observing this happen to her sister. Because then this style would have made sense, at least. But yeah, I thought that she was delightful in it. I think most of the cast, like, they're doing their best with very little like to work with. I think that, you know, like, honestly, Dakota Johnson, innocent. Cosmo Jarvis simply just like wasn't giving a performance for the most part. Like,
I was really confused because like I said, like, he's a mumble actor and it works well in some roles, but for this one I felt like he was like, what exactly are we supposed to be doing? Like, they just put him in a costume, put him in front of the camera, and then like gave him no direction.
I also just don't think he and Dakota Johnson had great chemistry. And I think that like, I think the thing about like Anne and Captain Wentworth is that they have to have the kind of chemistry that you see why they're drawn back to each other. And but also like, I'm so sorry. I don't mean this to be mean, but like, who would want to get with this Anne Elliot? I don't understand.
Oh no,
like,
she's a red flag.
She's literally just a whole parcel of them. But yeah, in any case, I do want to say, before I forget to say this at the end, that I highly recommend everyone, if you want to watch a good Regency romance with some actual good representation as well, definitely go watch Mr. Malcolm's List because it is a delight. I love to see a like original Regency story. It is the writer of the book also wrote the adaptation, which is great to see. It's also female directed and it's beautiful and it has, people of color in the leading roles. That's all I'm going to say. You can read into that whatever you want. But in any case, for anyone who is disappointed by Persuasion, I highly recommend that you see Mr. Malcolm's List because it is by far the superior Regency film that has come out this year.
Excellent. I can't wait. I keep meaning to, but I am just so far behind on my viewing.
I get that. I so get that. I do think it is available to rent online now, finally. So you don't have to go out to see it, folks. You can rent it on iTunes. To start out though, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Persuasion and its adaptations. So Persuasion was the last novel that Jane Austen completed. She wrote it after Emma, which I think is really interesting. And she finished writing it in August of 1816. She died the following year in 1817 at the age of 41. She, I think it's interesting because she's writing this, as she's in her late 30s and 40. And it is about a woman who sort of thinks that she already is a spinster. But Persuasion wasn't actually published until 1818. It was actually published originally with Northanger Abbey in the same volume, which is particularly fun because they are both set partially in Bath. And actually, and I thought this was fascinating, they think that the title may not have been chosen by Jane. At one point, she was referring to the novel as The Elliots and may have intended to call it that. But the title was probably either chosen by Jane's brother, Henry Austen, or her sister, Cassandra. It was Henry who got the novel published after Jane's death. He had contacts in the publishing industry, and he was the one who put this in Northanger Abbey together to be published. So that's sort of a fun little tidbit that we actually don't know if she intended to call it Persuasion. But, it really is a story about getting a second chance at love, but also about the plight of single women forced to live on the kindness of their families. And that's something very interesting that I think you see throughout Jane Austen's work, is that she's very interested in the sort of what women have to deal with in Regency England. We see with the Dashwoods what happens to a family of women whenever their main protector dies and they don't have another relative to take them in. We see in the Bennets what happens to a family of girls whenever everything is entailed away from them. We see in Emma what it means for a woman to have her own money and to be secure financially, and sort of what that can lead her to. But we also, on the other hand, have Harriet, who was this penniless orphan from kind of nowhere. And we see sort of the decisions that she has to make. And in this novel, we see what it means to be a woman who thinks she may never marry and who, is living off of her relatives, as Jane was for most of her own life. And again, I'll talk about that more later. But this is by far Jane Austen's most mature novel. And it has been adapted before, many times before this unfortunate film. And I wish it was being adapted again because we almost had our Sarah Snook version. Rest in peace, baby cakes. But I do think that it's interesting to note that this is actually one of the less adapted of Jane Austen's works. And I think that is partially because there is something a little bit more tricky about it. This is sort of the first big Hollywood adaptation that we've had of it. And I think that's because it doesn't lend itself to sort of the romance genre as easily as something like Pride and Prejudice or Sense and Sensibility or Emma do. Because, like I said, it's got a very melancholy air to a lot of it, and it's more mature. It's more sort of self-reflective. But one of the earliest adaptations was in 1860. There was a BBC miniseries with Daphne Slater and Paul Daneman. And then in 1971, there was an ITV miniseries with Anne Furbank and Brian Marshall. I know that a lot of people are probably familiar with the 1995 film with Amanda Root and Kieran Hines, or the 2007 TV film with Sally Hawkins and Rupert Perry Jones. That one's really fun too because they shot a lot of that one in Bath, which is really fun. because obviously like parts of it are set there, which I love. And I do think like that is probably the best adaptation that we've had of it from what I've seen. Obviously, though, I'm about to talk about a lot of plays that I've not seen. This in the past like 10 years has had like a weird number of adaptations to the stage, which I find interesting. In 2010, there was a musical using music from the period. I would love to know more about that. If anyone knows about that, please be in touch. In 2011, there was a play at the Salisbury Playhouse that later went to the Genesian Theatre in 2019. In 2017, there was a play at the Royal Exchange Theatre in Manchester. And in 2018, there was a play by Sarah Rose Kearns. Also, that one I believe was actually in New York. In 2019, there was a modernization called Rational Creatures with Christina Pupo and Peter Giessel. Hopefully I said that somewhat right. And there have been some novels before that have sort of been novelizations of Persuasion. Obviously, I think it sort of is a story that lends itself well to modernization. And in 2015, there was actually a digital series adaptation called Classic Alice, which I'm interested in, may have to look up later. But obviously, it's something that has not been adapted to the same sort of level that a lot of Austen's other work has. But I think there are really good ways that you can adapt it, and it is a story that resonates with a lot of people, clearly. This ain't it.
Yeah. It's
but anyway,
I'm just speechless. Honestly, though, like I love the Rupert Henry Jones adaptation. I own it on DVD somewhere. I bought it when I was in college so that I could rewatch it when I was lonely.
Yes.
But I like it is weird now being like 2 years past 27 and like staring down 30 and like realizing that I'm now older than Anne Elliot and I'm still in the exact same situation as Anne Elliot. And it is like, it's weird. And I think, I don't know, maybe that's why I took even greater offense to this film, because it felt like it was making a joke out of a situation that is like very near and dear to my own heart. I don't know. I
do think as like slightly older women Austen fans, this is like weirdly, I don't want to say it's like offensive to me, but the way that they portray her for being this woman who like is single and hasn't gotten over this past love, I do find like a little offensive to women.
Yeah, just a little.
Especially because he seems fine. Like,
yeah,
he's been living it up.
He's fine. I mean,
and the whole point, like, I think too, like, Persuasion is a novel entirely about repressed emotion and not letting things show and not being able to talk about your feelings and having held this inside for years and having to sit by and have your heart break all over again as you're watching the only person you've ever loved, fall in love with someone else. And
been there, done that. Not fun.
So many of us have been there. And the worst part of it, I think, sometimes is having to hold it in and not being able to show, you know, and Anne is this character who puts everyone before herself, and because it's what she's been raised to do. And God, I just, the way that they discuss their feelings at every turn in this movie is so strange to me. I was like, shut up. Like,
just stop talking. This can be a silent film now.
It meant that the big reveal at the end didn't feel that big.
Not at all.
Like, I was like, okay.
I'm like, cool. Yeah. Anyways, is this the time for the credits now? Like, are we done? Yeah, it was interesting. And like I said, I've always loved Persuasion, and I am a Northanger Abbey girl. And because of that, the baths feature in both of these Jane Austen novels. And many years ago, when I was traveling abroad, we went to Bath and we went to the Great Pump Room and we had tea, and I took the waters and I lived to tell the tale. It tastes like sulfur, and like if you've ever been,
it really does.
rural America. It just tastes like well water. I can't say if it gave me magical healing properties or anything like that, but the tea was really nice and the scones are really nice. And everything about the Royal Crescent and Bath is just beautiful. And I think a lot of it is because like I really romanticized Bath because of Persuasion and the fact that they did film on the Royal Crescent, and it very much captured the essence of what Bath would have looked like when Jane Austen lived there. And I didn't really feel that with this adaptation of Bath and the presentation of that whole entire aspect of British culture at the time just kind of felt lost, which was a little disappointing. But I thought I would talk just very briefly about Bath. They were first built in 1704 before they were remodeled in 1751 and then entirely rebuilt between 1793 and 1799. The city of Bath has always been a place that has been visited for its alleged healing waters, including Henry VIII, who came to the Bath, not the Bath as it stands today, but the baths of the last 400 years. I just need to make that clear. I just realized the way I said that there has always been water there that people have come to, and there's always been like a form of baths there for like 400 years. But the reference I was making was to the baths that are basically there today. And then like
that gave me a terrible mental image though of like Henry VIII going to take a bath.
I know. I was like, it's one of those words that I'm just like, just roll with it. He's in a bathtub. No. Queen Anne also went there in the 18th century in an attempt to cure her issues with miscarrying. Bath, however, didn't really become a very popular social gathering spot until the latter 18th century, up until and into the 19th century, even up until like kind of the turn of the 20th century. It was still a very popular place for the aristocracy to go and to be seen. Beau Nash was the master of ceremonies in Bath. When the city was kind of rising in its notoriety, he lived near where the Theatre Royal is today. And he was really just responsible for making Bath this very fashionable resort destination. He was a dandy and he was really well liked, but he ended up at the end of his life falling on hard times. And he actually died in poverty and was like just basically a name that was essentially forgotten to history and time. Like his death kind of, there was no, real, like this is somebody who was like really well known in Bath, but by the time that he died, like nobody really cared about who he was or the contributions. They just continued living their like high life in Bath, which is just kind of sad to me. Throughout most of the late 18th century, going to the Grand Pump Room was really fashionable. It was a place to see and be seen. And like, as we see in Persuasion, like find matches and go to balls and like be out in society. It was like being out on the tongue. If you watch Bridgerton, it was very much that kind of like, I don't know, summer vacation. I feel like spring break, like it was that kind of like, this is where you went to get away from your normal life and to like party and have fun, and then go to baths. And like the baths had this whole like, to go to them, you had to follow a very specific set of rules. I was going to read them, but like it was a long list and I couldn't really find anything that like stood out. Very like 18th century rules of society, how women were supposed to dress, how the men were supposed to interact, how many people could be in a room, all of that kind of stuff, what you expect from Regency era decorum. By the time that Jane Austen and her family came to live in Bath in 1801, it was no longer just an exclusive haunt for the aristocracy. They were letting everybody in. Everybody was there to be seen and have a good time. People would dress up more fancily so that they would look like they were part of the aristocracy. But like, they were like the Bennets coming to town. Like they were letting the riffraff in at that point.
Did you just call my girl Lizzie Bennett the riffraff?
I think Lizzie would take that with a badge of pride.
Okay.
Like, yeah, I am the riffraff.
No, what she would say is
still gonna fall in love with it.
What she would say is, yes, you are correct. Lydia is the riffraff.
Honestly, I was thinking Lydia when I said it, but I was like,
Yeah.
she's been through enough. She doesn't need to be slammed on this podcast.
Whoops. Well,
what if Lydia was listening?
Lydia, I love you. Let's find you a therapist.
Yes. Yes. Family therapy, individual therapy, couples therapy, all of it. You'll be fine.
They need all of it.
All of it. Just, we're going to hire you a live-in therapist. And Lydia would probably fall in love with them. Anyway.
It's true.
Anyways, so there's really no easy way. We're going to segue back to another family. The Austen family lived in Sydney Palace over the Putney Bridge that was next to Laura place. This is in Bath. Look at a map. I felt like this was important to just kind of contextualize that they lived in Bath, and that's why these last two novels, Northanger Abbey and Persuasion, are both set in part in Bath, because it was something that Jane Austen was writing from experience, and she hated Bath and she hated the society in Bath and just like despised everything about it, but still manages to write about it with a certain fondness that I find kind of interesting. Like, she uses it as a really engaging location and setting for some really fun stuff for both of those books. So I think that's kind of interesting that even though she had like a disdain for it, she understood the impact that it had on the characters that she was placing with inside of it. And then the Great Pump Rooms, you can still visit them today. They are not, however, like fully historically accurate because they have been remodeled. They did go to great lengths to try to restore them to what they look like, but they did suffer a significant amount of damage when they were bombed in World War II. Like, most of Britain. But if you ever are in Bath, I highly recommend going there, whether you are an Austenite or you just love interesting British history. Both the pump room and the actual Roman baths right beside it are just fascinating. And then to walk the Crescent is just very neat to me. And just everything about Bath is wonderful, and I miss it. It's been like 10 years this summer, I think.
Such a fun city. It's also, if you're in London, a really easy day trip.
It's so easy to get there.
It's so easy to get there and back. Like, and it's also, you can do like a nice day getting in that and Stonehenge if you're like want to see Stonehenge. At risk of sounding like an absolute snob, I found Stonehenge a little underwhelming.
It was very underwhelming.
Thank you. Okay, I was like, I thought it would be taller.
The only thing I liked about Stonehenge was like the pagan connection. The actual Stonehenge, I was like, I could have just looked at the picture. Oh, okay. I was like, I'm cold, because it was very windy and it was very cold when I went. I'm like, I'm cold, a little damp, and this was kind of a long walk.
Okay, I truly was like, I could be in Bath still eating nice food and looking at historic buildings.
Yes, 100%. I'm like, can I just go have more scones, please?
You can do tea in the royal, what did I just lose the words? Wow. You can do
the grand pump room.
Thank you. Whew. It's because of what I saw before this podcast, Maggie. It broke my brain. But you can do tea in the royal pump room. It's super cute. It's super fun. Actually, like a very nice tea service too for afternoon tea, and not that expensive. So highly recommend that, and like doing the actual tour of the baths. Like, God, what a place. Maggie, we're just making ourselves sad at this point.
We are.
So I'm gonna make us sadder. And talk about unmarried women.
We're talking about us.
We are talking about us. And actually that's a good opening, because the average age of marriage for women was between 23 and 27.
I'm a spinster.
You're a spinster. And I am quite literally, my 28th birthday is in like a month and a half. So I'm right on the verge of spinsterhood. Although I do think it's worth noting, Lydia says in Pride and Prejudice, Jane will be quite an old maid soon, I declare. She is almost 3 and 20. And obviously that's a little bit just like a younger sister taking the mick out of an older sister and being like, you're an old maid at 23. Like, my sister's been telling me I'm old since I was 16. But I do think it's worth noting that, like, even though the average age of marriage is that, it also, like, 27 is seen as older to be getting married for a woman. And that also, like, there's weird skews in terms of, like, the lower classes tend to get married later. And, once they can support themselves, and the upper classes tend to get married earlier because they're doing it also to sort of, make alliances between families and all that sort of stuff as well.
And then wouldn't it sometimes also matter if like you lived on a farm? Some people who lived in farms would get married younger so they would have children to help them. Yeah. I was like thinking about my own family. Like a lot of people in my family were married by like 17 and 18. And I'm like, that's so young.
Yep.
And then they'd have like 20 kids by 28. And I'm like, it's insane.
So I think like what we see in Pride and Prejudice is that when Lydia is getting married at 15, it's seen as young, but not like scandalously so per se. Obviously her marriage is scandalous for other reasons, but I think, Emma Woodhouse is 21 and she's unmarried, and it's not really like a problem for her. She's not on the shelf or anything. But when she gets married, as she's, either still 21 or 22, it's not seen as like early per se. But so people are getting married in their 20s, basically, for the most part in Regency England. For men, it's a little older. For women, you don't have to sort of go out and make your career or anything, so you can get married sooner. Your marriage is your career, essentially, as if you're of a certain class. And I think that, part of why I want to talk about this is Jane Austen's writing this novel as someone who has been single her whole life. She's had some, hints of romance, but nothing's ever worked out. And she was really firmly in spinster territory. She's at, her late 30s, 40 while she's writing this. And she had spent her life living off the kindness of, first her father and then her siblings, basically. She and her mom and her older sister, Cassandra, who had been engaged, but her fiance died at sea, I believe, if I remember that correctly. They sort of bounced around between different family homes and had to rely on her brothers for help. And I think that you see a lot of that and a lot of her own experiences of that in Elliot's experiences, and how she, sort of gets sent to help Mary because, Mary needs help with her kids and her household. And then she sort of gets shipped back to her dad and her other sister. And there's sort of this feeling that if she did not end up with Wentworth, that would have been what the rest of her life looked like. Anne Elliot is the same age as Charlotte Lucas, I think it's worth noting. And, we all know the classic 2005 Pride and Prejudice line, I'm 27 years old, I've no money and no prospects, I'm already a burden to my parents, and I'm frightened. And I think at 27, as a woman, you would be frightened. Yeah, same, like so relatable. But I do think, in Regency England, if you're 27 years old and you're an unmarried woman of middle or upper class, you are frightened. If you are not betrothed. Married women were more well respected than spinsters. Even unmarried men past a certain age were seen as unusual and kind of sketchy. Obviously a man could be a bachelor a bit longer and it was fine. But, we see in sort of these novels even, when a bachelor comes to town, everybody's like, let's get him married. Because that was just sort of what life was meant to be to people in Regency England. And in tax documents from the period, men are identified by their occupation or their social status. If they're a landowning wealthy gentleman, or they're a cobbler or whatever. Women are identified by their marital status. Wife, widow, or spinster, once they're past, just being a daughter in their father's home. Now, there are some records that show that 1 in 4 upper class women didn't marry, which I think is really interesting whenever you think about that. Means that there's 1 in 4 women who are living with this stigma. And, you can think like, oh, well, maybe was it not as bad as it seems or whatever. But I can tell you as a 27-year-old single woman, I have no doubt that the stigma was absolutely there, even if, 25% of women were unmarried. But a well-off single woman like Emma Woodhouse could lead a happy life, probably. But women like Anne Elliot, who are in this sort of more upper middle class situation, are in a really weird spot because they can't live on their own. They can't sort of be the head of a household. No, if you're a widow, you can. But as a married woman, you really can't comfortably, not respectably anyways. And you can't work most jobs and maintain your social class. The only jobs really available to a middle class woman are to be a companion or to be a governess. But a lot of women actually don't even have the option of being a governess because they're not well educated enough to go educate someone else's children. Particularly because a governess often would educate sort of younger male children as well. So they need to like actually know some things, speaking by the educational standards of the day. So it puts you in like a really weird spot. Also, even if you want to go be a governess, that's a difficult life because once again, you have these very weird working hours. You are vulnerable to the men in the house. And the governess in particular is in a really weird social status because she is seen as above the servants of the household, but below the family in the household. So she doesn't really fit in anywhere. And reports of women who worked as governesses were that it was a very isolating position. Because really your only companions would be the children that you were, teaching and taking care of. And obviously, if you're stuck in a house where the kids are brats, then that's going to be a pretty miserable life. Otherwise, unmarried women would spend their days living with relatives, sometimes bouncing between relatives. Sometimes, relatives might help them and put them up in a little house or a cottage on their property or in a nearby town. And they would be expected to help out. They would be expected to, take care of children, take care of sick people, do mending, maybe even do some work in the kitchen, and really make themselves useful to the household. And even then they might sometimes be treated sort of as a burden on the household, which is, it seems sometimes, I think, like whenever we read Pride and Prejudice, we watch Pride and Prejudice, like Mrs. Bennet's being sort of unreasonable in her pursuit to marry off her 5 daughters. But whenever you really think about what the options are for them, it suddenly does not seem as unreasonable. Because being a single woman in Regency England past a certain age was honestly a pretty difficult circumstance to find yourself in and make any sort of happy, contented life. So, as much as I might resent when my family, pull that, like, are you seeing anyone yet? Card on me at Thanksgiving. We've got it a lot better now, at least.
We do. At least we can be independent women.
Yep.
Yeah. With podcasts.
That's what Anne Elliot needed. She just needed a podcast.
Yeah, she just needed to be a podcast girly.
Yeah. Honestly, she probably just needed a friend, but
yeah, it's actually quite tragic that she doesn't really have any like good friends. There's never a good way to segue into talking about costumes. But yeah, there were costumes in this movie. The costumes were designed by Mary Ann Agertoft, I believe is how you say her name, who is best known for doing the costumes on the Les Miserables. Wow, cut that. I did not just say that wrong.
Something.
Like, I saw miserable and I just went
You
with
were
it.
the last person I would expect to hear say that wrong.
Miserable. We were just talking about being single and my brain was
true.
Miserable. I'm going to read. Please don't include that. Do not put it at the end of the episode. I will never be able to show myself on the internet again. Let's be miserable. So So the costumes were designed by Mary Ann Agertoft, who is best known for doing the costumes on the Les Mis series, which star Joseph Quinn as Enjolras, adding that in just for Nicole and for me. Netflix's short-lived Cursed series was also costume designed by her as well as 8 episodes of Poldark and Death Comes to Pemberley. All of that is to show that she can actually do some really good.
Wait, yeah, the Death Comes to Pemberley costumes are gorgeous.
Really good. Yeah, when I saw that she was responsible for these shows, all of which, I mean, Cursed is like Camelot basically, but like still like really good costumes in all of these shows. And like Poldark, I was just kind of even more bewildered by what she chose to do with specifically Anne Elliot in this movie. I mean, like the costumes are fine. There, are plenty of Empire waist silhouettes and puff sleeves and bonnets and like all of the things that you expect from a Regency era film. But like, I'm livid about the hair choices. I'm livid about the makeup choices. I hate it. That god awful bonnet they put her in when she's out like shopping. It kind of looked like a top hat. It was just like hideous. I hated it.
Yep.
It was a choice. It was not a 10. I was like, it's giving a 1.
It's that TikTok sound that's like, I want to give it a 0, but I can't. So yes. I'll give it a 1.
That's exactly how I felt with that hat. There's just a lot of weird choices. And like, I guess I should have trusted my gut when I started to worry when I read an interview from Mary Ann, like before the movie came out, where she was talking about the fact that Patti Smith and Debbie Harry and Audrey Hepburn were all of her like design inspirations for the film. Yeah. And I understand that inspiration doesn't always have to be pulled from contemporaries of whatever project you're working on, but none of those evoke Regency fashion inspo in my mind, like not even a little bit.
Like none of those fit either the period or the character.
No.
So I'm just confused.
Oh, and it gets worse. I found like another interview where she was talking about how like Dakota as Anne, like the stompy boots that she was wearing were supposed to be like Debbie Harry, and then like the shirting choices that they had for her were supposed to be like evoking thoughts of Patti Smith and her more like boyish attire, and how she would like wear leather jackets and denim jackets and like men's shirts over dresses. That was her inspiration. And then like she also had this idea of like Audrey Hepburn with delicate jackets. And I was like, that doesn't even fit with like the concept of Debbie Harry, but okay. Or Patti Smith. And then like she talked about how like Vincent Cassell was an inspiration for Mr. Elliot, and Steve McQueen and Bruce Springsteen was her inspiration for Captain Wentworth. None of which these inspirations are nowhere to be found in these characters. Like, I truly am just bewildered. Honestly, it confused me. I was like, did you just go, I'm just going to stick some random men and some random women up on these like inspiration boards and take it to Netflix and be like, here's my inspiration. And they'd be like, here's a couple $1 million. Have fun. And like, there was just a lot of weird choices, and combing through interviews and watching some interviews today just continued to compound my frustration with this film. Because like, I say this as somebody who like prefers masculine clothing, like in general. Like, I spend most of my time in like boxer shorts and like oversized men's t-shirts, and like I love a good button up, and like there's a lot of stuff in my wardrobe that is what I guess the kids call a mask these days, and like always has been. But I found it really frustrating how, in order for them to do Anne the way that this film does Anne, like the costume designer talks about like wanting to make her seem more masculine. And I think it's weird to approach an unmarried woman as like the reason for, or like the causation of her being unmarried by a certain age is for her to start dressing masculine. It's I don't know if they think they're doing something with gender norms, but it's just reinforcing them.
I hate that.
I hate it. And like she talks about
as someone who also like dresses like I find a lot of inspiration in like androgynous fashion. Like
too.
I also like to mix it with feminine fashion because wow. Yeah, I really don't like the idea that like they felt that they had to strip her of her femininity.
Yeah, I hate it. And like she talked about how like she wanted her to wear men's drawers that opened in the front instead of being the way they were supposed to be, and that's what Dakota was wearing under her dresses. And I was like, but that doesn't even practically make any sense because like drawers, like, very sorry for the people listening to this, like drawers aren't supposed to be some sort of fashion statement you wear under your clothes. It's so you can go to the bathroom, and like that doesn't work. Like
that just doesn't make any sense.
It's like you had layers of skirts and like they were designed a specific way to facilitate being able to use loo. And like it's not some sort of like power statement. Like I'm gonna wear men's drawers and then lay on my bedroom floor and get drunk. Like it's weird and it's regressive and it's this girl bossification that I cannot stand with this current slate of films. Like they and that is like that's
this movie really said gaslight gatekeep girl boss.
It did. And then the thing is that in their effort to like girl bossify a character like Anne Elliot, it undermines the relationship that is at the heart of the story. And that's why, like, I think the final act of this film, when they finally get together, falls so flat because they work so hard to make it seem like, why are either of these people pursuing each other? Like, they strip so much of the romantic part of it away that it just did not work.
I literally cannot figure out for the life of me, like from watching this movie, why these two people would be together.
Like, no, they didn't even seem to like each other.
And there was no chemistry.
I'm just, again, I'll say bewildered by the idea that they were ever even close to getting married because like they didn't have it.
Nope.
Frankly, none of the characters had it, but like that's like even her weird thing with like Mr. Elliot felt like, why is he interested in her even in the least? Like we know why, but like it didn't seem right. And
also he felt miscast to me.
He was so miscast. He should have been Whitworth.
Yep. I mean, really and truly, Oscar Isaac should have been Whitworth, but
yes, well,
I can't think about that for too long.
Like,
but no, he should have been Wentworth. Like,
it's weird to me, and like the costumes aren't the worst part of the movie, but they certainly don't help it. And I think that just reading it even more and reading the interviews with the creatives, like they fundamentally did not understand not only the story and not only the characters, but just like this time period, like. If I was somebody who was like making a movie and my costume designer was like, yeah, Patti Smith and Debbie Harry are my inspiration for Anne Elliot, I'd be like, you're fired. Get out of here. Like, open a Godey's women's book. Like, why are you putting modern by, contemporary, comparison? Why are you putting these people on a board? That's the kind of thing, like, that would be like Dakota's responsibility. Like, if she's wanting to find inspiration and like other spaces and like how different women approach things, like that's her responsibility. I don't really see how those could be inspirations for this character at all.
I mean, even if you were, because I'm okay with the idea of like, okay, we're going to take inspiration from these like figures, but it needs to be figures that like make sense character-wise.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think those do. Like, yeah.
Controversially, I think that if we're going to pull from like a modern person, I feel like somebody like Kate Bush would be a good inspiration because, and I'm not just saying that because Wuthering Heights is like my favorite song of hers and like has always ended up on any like historical romance playlist of mine. I feel like her aesthetic at the height of her career, or even somebody like Sarah Brightman when she was doing 80s music videos.
Honestly, even if you were going to say, let's look at like someone like Emma Thompson or Emma Watson, women who, because like, it's also hard though, because Anne Elliot in the book is like the person who has it together at all times. Like she's the one you want in a crisis. And those are two women who I think have a really nice something of like, they seem like the person you want to go to in a crisis. They seem like they've got it all together. They still have a very nice feminine touch in all of their looks. Like, cool. I see it. But whenever you're just truly, like clearly trying to be edgy, that's what doesn't make sense to me for the character of Aunt Elliot. Like, if you had those style references, like, and you were doing even like a Pride and Prejudice, I'd be more like, okay, maybe. But
yeah, even because I feel like Lizzie is more of the I'm gonna put boots on and chomp through the mud.
Like, there's literally whole passages about like, and then
She's
her muddy him. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas Anne is not that. That's not who Anne is in the book. She's very put together. She's very not reserved, but she's not Lizzie Bennet.
Okay, it's so funny actually, and like I hate to hijack this section, but on the note of what we're saying, the part in the movie where he's all like, Anne is the person that you need in a crisis. Anne always knows what to do is so funny because A, we've seen nothing but her fall apart the whole film, and B, her grand moment in a crisis when Louisa falls, a move that also does not make sense for how they've played Louisa the whole film.
No.
Is her being like, someone get a doctor. No, you be patient. And they're like, wow, she's so capable.
I know. When they were like, you should stay, Anne, I was like, get her away from this injured woman. She's going to like accidentally smother her or something.
She's going to like just spill wine all down her or something.
Yeah, she's going to get drunk, be like, oh, you look like you're uncomfortable laying there. Let me like put a pillow. And then, oops, I fell asleep on you and smothered you. Like, she was not capable. She was a mess. And like, they could have done something with that too. Like, if they wanted to play up wine aunt, and like, I don't know, there's a way to play that as like showing like weakness or I don't know, giving some depth to it instead of all of it being played off for like really ill-placed laughs.
Yep. There's a way to acknowledge that like there is something genuinely sad about that. Like, yeah. Anyways, go see Mr. Malcolm's List.
Yeah. Go rewatch Bridgerton. I don't know.
Yeah, go watch Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice, Autumn de Wilde's Emma, Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. Yeah. For that matter, like, go watch Sanditon. Like, literally anything else.
Go watch Poldark. I don't know. Just pulling things out of my hat now.
Yeah. Go watch the Les Mis miniseries. In any case,
we all know it's a truth universally acknowledged that you have to be you have to be hot to be on Joel Ross, and they definitely like succeeded on that one.
They delivered.
And then all the girlies will lose their mind over you in another role down the line.
It's so actually, okay, I just have to say, and I hate to be this gatekeepy person, but it is really funny to watch like everyone lose their minds over Joseph Quinn now. When I'm like, I watched him on Catherine the Great and
but actually
years ago, and Howard's End. I literally have seen
but actually
so things.
I know, I feel the same way. I did the same thing when people realized that he was in the Les Mis miniseries. I was like, fake fan.
I'm like, I literally watched Howard's End as it premiered. Like, y'all can
guess. I remember when like the casting announcement went out about him being in Stranger Things. It's like, that Joel Ross lad is going to be in this.
I was truly like, our period drama boy. Like,
I was like, it's cool. He's still in a period drama. It's the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, he's getting more modern.
I am always here to root for anyone who has played on Joel Ross. Like.
My thing is, I'd like him actually back in period dramas ASAP. So
I would too.
I'd like him to be like the male equivalent to the Keira Knightley. Like, make it your shtick. Like, come on, Joe. Let me run your career.
Get cast in Bridgerton.
Truly, okay, Bridgerton people, if you're out there listening,
I know you love this podcast.
What you need to do is cast Joe Quinn. He's already on that good Netflix salary. Just throw him over to your next set. Truly, you can make him a role if you don't have one for him. It will be worth it, I promise. Because the Duffer Brothers are probably kicking themselves right now.
Oh, they should be on TikTok. TikTok has answered all of the ways they could bring that boy back to Stranger Things. I don't even watch Stranger Things. I have never watched it. I have just absorbed so much of it because of work. And like, even I have theories about how they can bring him back.
Listen, okay. Also, I gotta say, I'm watching season 3 right now. I had not seen it. And I watched like 2 episodes and I was like, holy shit, I'm hooked. So,
I think that Stranger Things and I have a better relationship when I don't watch it. So like, I just read the fanfics and I watch the TikToks and like I watch the YouTube videos.
Okay, we got to talk after this.
And that's just that's my relationship with Stranger Things.
Look, but my new campaign is get Joe Keery in a period drama ASAP. I need to see that hair paired with a cravat.
Is he American? I literally know nothing about Joe Keery.
He is. He's
I was gonna say he seems like he's an American boy. He needs like a Newsies era TV show or a movie or something. Like I don't want to see him doing a British accent because for some reason I feel like he can't do a good one, and then people will make fun of him. Like it'll be one of those accents.
Joe can give him
like,
lessons.
Yeah, but it'll be like one of those accents that's like really good in the first act, but then by the end of the movie, like they just completely like abandon it. You know those accents that Americans do when they become British. I'm talking about Dakota Johnson, who like just her accent. I was like, I know you are married. Like she's not married yet, but she is basically. They've been together for like 8 years. She lives with a British man. Did he not? Prepare her?
Also, this is going to sound really funny, but Henry Golding is British, but something was going on with his voice in this movie.
I was flummoxed.
Like, I don't know if they were trying to get him to do a different accent than his actual accent or whatever.
Did not go.
I don't know if he was trying to do something different with his voice. Like, it didn't work. Whatever it was, it didn't work.
Cosmo had the most convincing British accent.
Yeah.
And he's barely raised in Britain, if I remember reading. Like, he's, I think, American Armenian and then raised briefly in Ireland, I think. I believe. I can't remember what his bio. I know he's American Armenian, but I cannot remember the rest of his bio in terms of where he grew up. But he does like Irish really well and he does British really well. And I'm like, you have the best accent of these people. What is going on here? Yeah, so many questions. I will be sending Netflix my words if they let these people do more. Because we already know they like to greenlight things that are not great. Great man. I'm sorry. Who said that?
Who said that?
Who said that? Anyways, we are now just like faffing around. Yeah. So
in any case, thanks so much for joining us in our 43rd episode of Petticoats
Insanity. We would love to hear from you on social media and to hear what you thought about Persuasion. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you make it through this episode even though you were like seething in anger at our opinions on this film? I want to know. Like, flame us. It's okay. We're big girls. We can take it. We know we're right. So, I mean, we know we're right. So.
That's true. You can find us on social media at HGATM. Yeah, I said that right. Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie over at Maggie of the Town. You can find me at Nicole Ackman 16.
You can listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Earglue Media website, and of course on Audible. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, and on Spotify. Every few episodes or whenever you share your thoughts, we'll be reading your reviews, our reviews. So this is just, we lost the plot. So be sure to leave us one if you want. Honestly, like, Persuasion just broke our brains. Very sorry. Yep. If you're on this episode, you've probably listened before. You probably know where to find us. You get it. You get it. You
get it. But we'll be back soon with another episode about a better film as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
As we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective.
Go watch The Les Mis.
Go
miniseries.
watch literally anything but this.